All right, moving on in this section about non-essential but helpful gear, we have to talk about camera filters, and specifically, this is an ND filter. Now, obviously there are lots of different types of filters and it can get overwhelming, but I want to narrow your focus down on just two different things. We have neutral density filters and circular polarizer filters. Now, to make things even more simple, here's how you can think of them in a general sense. Neutral density filters are like sunglasses for your camera. They cut down on the amount of light entering your camera, whether it's a mirrorless DSLR or even smartphone camera. And by cutting down on the total amount of light entering the camera, it's going to make your image darker. And that's literally the primary purpose of an ND filter. You can see just looking through it, it makes the image a lot darker. Now, why would that matter? Why would people want to make their image darker? Well, let's say you're filming outside and it's really bright. Sometimes when we're in situations like this, we actually have to sacrifice some of our ideal exposure settings on our camera. Doing this won't absolutely kill our image. It's okay if some of the settings aren't perfect, but we're gonna miss out on a few things that ideally we'd want in our content. Specifically, if you're filming in auto mode on your phone or on a camera outside, and it's really bright, you're gonna lose motion blur. Now, motion blur might sound like a bad thing, but when it comes to video content, motion blur is actually really important. We have an entire video on this concept in the course. But in a nutshell, if you wave your hand in front of your eyes and you try to focus on your fingers, you're gonna see blur. Nothing is perfectly sharp when it's moving as far as our eyes are concerned. So this is where a neutral density filter comes in. When it's super bright outside, instead of having to sacrifice some of our settings, we can put this filter on our lens. It usually will screw directly onto our lens. It's going to cut down on that light and allow us to bring our settings back down to where we'd like them to be. So that is neutral density in a nutshell. Now, when it comes to actually buying your neutral density filter, there are three factors you really want to key in on. The first is the cost. How much do you want to spend? Filters can get stupidly expensive. We're talking thousands of dollars, but I imagine most people, myself included, aren't going to spend that money. I think anywhere from $50 to $300 is a good budget to kind of set for getting one good neutral density filter. And I'll have specific brands linked below. Now, the second thing you need to consider is the amount of neutral density, essentially how dark, how much light you want your filter to block out. This is measured in stops, with the higher the stop, meaning more light getting blocked. One stop of neutral density will block out a little light, 2 will block out more, 5 will block out significantly more, and you can just keep on going up. Now, the cool thing is you don't have to just pick one number and go with it. Most neutral density filters being purchased are actually called variable ND filters. You can see here, there are essentially two rings that when you twist will actually change the amount of light that's getting blocked by the lens. This right here is 2 stops of neutral density. If I rotate it, you can see it gets darker. This is 5 stops of neutral density. So it would definitely have to be very bright to use this. And this is actually the range that I recommend most people get if they're only getting one neutral density filter. It would be a 2 to 5 stop variable ND filter. Now, if yours is 1 to 6 or 2 to 7, that's close enough. And I think you will get a lot of use out of that. Now, the third thing you need to consider is the filter size. Now, smartphones we're going to touch on in a second, but with lenses on professional or mirrorless cameras, whatever you want to call it, every lens might have a different actual opening. This is called the thread size. So for example, here I have this filter, which is actually too small to screw onto this lens. It's just not going to work. Ideally, if you have one lens that you're using, you want to get a thread size of your filter that's going to match your lens. But unfortunately, things in life aren't always simple. And if you're like me, you have multiple different lenses that all have multiple different thread sizes. For example, this 24 to 70 millimeter is an 82. You can see it right there. It's marked as 82, and that is essentially talking about how big the opening is. The lens that I'm shooting on right now is a 72 millimeter thread size. But thankfully, there are people smart enough out there to come up with these things. These are called step-up rings, and it essentially allows you to attach this to whatever lens you have, which changes the thread size that then allows you to attach larger or smaller filters. So the pro tip that I'd like to give you here is that you always want to buy filters that are bigger than the thread size of the lenses you have versus smaller. Because if you use a lens that is smaller, it'll essentially look like this. You'll literally see the rings on the side because the filter isn't big enough to cover the entire lens. So instead, you want to buy something bigger and then get a step-up ring that then goes outside of the thread. You then twist it on and you're never going to see the edges because they're already way outside of the actual lens. So that's neutral density filters. I personally think that's the #1 filter to buy for most content creators. Now, the second type of filter that's really important is a polarizer, and the most common type is a circular polarizer. Now, if a neutral density filter is like sunglasses and it just cuts down on all light, the way that I want you to think about a polarizer is that it only cuts down on high intense reflections. So let's say you're filming somebody and their forehead is a little sweaty, and the light bouncing off their forehead is really bright because the sweat is going to reflect that light way more. A circular polarizer could be used to put on top of your camera, and then you actually rotate it. That's why it's called a circular polarizer, because it's all about essentially blocking the angle of that reflection, and it's going to minimize that reflection like crazy, which a lot of times will improve the look of your final video. And both of these also work with photos, by the way. Now, it's not only for sweaty foreheads. Let's imagine you're out near water. There's also a lot of reflections when it comes to water, and circular polarizers will cut down on that. It could be reflections from glass in city buildings. It could be a slight glare you get from pavement. It could be the reflection of light bouncing off the metal edge of a car. Either way, a circular polarizer will cut down on those reflections and hopefully improve the look of your content. Now, what's also really cool is a lot of variable ND filters actually dual as a circular polarizer. The simple fact of having those two rotating pieces of glass up against one another will also carry out a lot of polarization or reduction of those reflections for your content. So that's basically it. And as always, there are thousands of these on the internet, but I want to give you some brand recommendations. The two brands that I use the most are overall Polar Pro. And this one here is the Peter McKinnon variable ND filter. I really love this. I think it's super high quality, but it is kind of expensive. Now, if you wanted to go all the way down to my most budget recommendations, that brand would be K&F. You can usually find decent filters at around the $50 to $100 price range. And then after that, the kind of mid-tier brand is Nisi, N-I-S-I. They sell all different types of filters. They're usually very high quality, and those are going to be in the $150 to $250 range. Now, you might be asking, okay, Anthony, that makes sense for professional cameras. How do I do this with my smartphone? There are actually a lot of different ways to do this, but I think the easiest way is to get a tool like this. This is a universal filter mount for smartphones, and it's sold by Sandmark. You essentially just take this, you position it over whichever lens of your camera that you know you're going to be using on your smartphone. And then from there, if you had a filter that perfectly matched the thread size, you could just use it, or you can do what most people do, which is also use one of these step-up filters. And by the way, these are all already attached to each other. Individually, they're much smaller. I just store them like this for the purpose of essentially not losing them, because I know I would lose all of them if I didn't. But individually, you can see this is actually still two together right here. They do pack down much smaller. This kit is the K&F step-up filter kit. It's really cheap and still really high quality on Amazon. So that's one option, and this universally will work on basically all phones. The only thing to consider is, it could fall off. I don't really see how you'd really have to shake this thing off to fall off, but it is something that you could run into. Now, another thing that I've tested that I do like, although I don't know if it would be my top recommendation, is this magnetic clip, and I'll link it below. We essentially stick this magnet right here on the back of our phone, and then that will go right on it, and now we have a thread that we can put more filters on. The only issue with this, as you can imagine, that's a lot of faith being put on a magnet on the back of your phone. I definitely don't think that I would use my $300 or so Polar Pro ND filter on this unless I was being very careful. This is an ND filter from shopmoment.com, another brand that I really like. I probably would be fine using these two together because this isn't quite as expensive. But nonetheless, you just want to be careful. I wouldn't be like running around, jumping, and doing a lot of stuff with this mount on. But if it was just on a tripod, or I was just casually filming handheld, not doing anything crazy, this is probably the most convenient and easy mount to use. Then last but not least, certain companies make specific cases for their phones. So this is actually a case that I bought from shopmoment.com, same as that ND filter I just showed you a second ago. They also sell this drop-in mount right here. So this pops in, and now I can place that on my phone. And now you can see we actually have these mounts on the lenses of my camera that I can specifically plug different elements into. Now, I wish they just had a filter thread that I could plug right in there, but usually what I end up doing if I use this case is I use one of their lenses. So this is the 58mm lens. Again, it's sold by shopmoment.com. Now we have the Moment case and the Moment lens here. I can literally just twist that on. And although I don't really use lenses all that much with my smartphone, the one main reason why I do love this setup is because that thing is in there. Like, that's locked into the case. It's a mechanical connection. I could pull that as hard as I want, and the only thing that would get it to come out is if I broke the relatively sturdy plastic on the actual mount there. So you can see, definitely pretty cool. And now from there, they also sell these filter mounts. So I can then take this, place it on top of the lens. And now that right there is gonna give me the correct thread size to use this. So I can twist this right on. And now we've got the sexiest looking smartphone camera setup on planet Earth. Check that out. We got a variable ND filter to a 58mm lens on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. Is it the best for content creation? I don't know, that's up to the person and the type of content that's being created, but I will tell you, if you use this on social media, people will ask you nonstop what lens you're using. So I've got to spend the next 10 minutes putting all this stuff away, but you officially now know everything there is to know about neutral density, polarizers, and how to use these filters on the cameras that you have. As always, I've linked everything in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.